Good evening, afternoon or morning. Movie Cat is at the microphone and today I will tell you about the comedy drama Forrest Gump.
Have you given any thought to your future?
1981. Forrest Gump sits on a bench at a bus stop in Savannah, Georgia. To the people who sit next to him from time to time, he tells the story of his life. About 3 decades ago, Forrest grows up in Greenbow, Alabama. He is raised by a single mother. Little Forrest has back problems and is forced to wear special braces on his legs. In addition, his IQ is only 75, which is not enough to get into a regular school, according to the modern American medical classification. This is considered borderline of a mental retardation. Forrest's mother has sex with the school director in her own house to give her son an opportunity to study. During Forrest's childhood, a young Elvis Presley stops at his mother's house for a while. After communicating with Forrest, Elvis adopts from him the now famous manner of swinging his hips in the dance. Later, Forrest and his mother would see Elvis Presley on TV in a shop window, performing his hit Hound Dog and dancing exactly like Forrest does. In the school bus, Forrest meets Jenny and she becomes his best friend. Jenny taught him to read, and Forrest showed her how to swing upside down on a tree. Jenny and her sisters, after the early death of their mother, live with their father, a small farmer who drinks too much. Although little Gump considers him a loving father because he kisses and touches Jenny and her sisters all the time. Every day Jenny doesn't like coming home and tries to stay at Forrest's house till a very evening. Local hooligans constantly offend Forrest. One day they chase him on their bicycles and Forrest, running very fast, breaks and loses his leg braces. From that day forward, wherever Forrest goes, he does it by running. A few days later, Jenny's drunken father chases after Jenny to beat her up, so the local cop later says that Jenny doesn't have to live with her father anymore, so she moves to her grandmother, who lives near the Forrest's house. In high school, when Forrest is chased by grown-up hooligans, this time in a car, the guy, running away from them, accidentally ends up in a stadium where an American football game is being played. Forrest runs to the touchdown zone twice as fast as the players. The coach notices Gump's amazing running speed and recruits him for the University of Alabama team, so Forrest becomes a student. Thanks to his speed, he plays for the university football team so successfully that he is among the best amateur athletes in the United States, who are even invited to the White House by President Kennedy. Jenny is studying at another college and Gump goes to visit her whenever possible. One day, out of pity, the girl decides to have sex with Forrest, but the guy is worried and nothing comes of it. Then they just sit down to talk. Jenny says she dreams of becoming famous. After graduating from university, Gump is taken by the army. At boot camp, he meets Benjamin Bubba Buffett Blue. They become friends. Bubba dreams of starting a shrimp fishing business after the war. Both of them are sent to the Vietnam War, and there they end up in Lieutenant Dan's platoon. For a while, Forrest is in Vietnam writing letters to Jenny, until his platoon is suddenly ambushed by guerrillas. Gump saves half the platoon by carrying the injured soldiers from the battlefield on his shoulders, including Lieutenant Dan. Unfortunately, Bubba dies. Forrest is injured in the buttock, that's why he ends up in the hospital and never returns to the battlefield. At the hospital, Forrest meets Lieutenant Dan, who has had both of his legs amputated above the knee. In the United States, Gump receives the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award, from President Lyndon Johnson. The president asks what kind of wound the soldier received, and Forrest exposes his buttock in front of him, which greatly amuses the president. Walking after the awards ceremony in Washington, Forrest accidentally comes to an anti-war meeting, where Gump is offered to say a few words about the war, but law enforcement officers pull out the cable from the speakers before Forrest can talk about the injuries and deaths that happened to his platoon. There Forrest meets Jenny, who has now become a hippie and has joined the anti-war movement. In their lair, the leader of this movement slaps Jenny, that's why Forrest beats him up. Jenny gets mad at Forrest for this and disappears from his life again. In the army, after being wounded, Forrest starts playing table tennis. Taking into account the specifics of his thinking, Gump is never bored, so he can train for hours without stopping. Such diligence leads Forrest to an international tennis tournament in China, where Gump wins. After that, Forrest is invited to attend a late-night show with John Lennon on television. On the way out of the television studio, Forrest meets Lieutenant Dan. Suffering from Vietnam syndrome and losing his legs, the lieutenant, in his own words, began to train his hands, lifting bottles of whiskey for his veteran allowance. He does not thank to Forrest for saving his life, but, on the contrary, blames him for not letting the lieutenant die on the battlefield. Dan is sure that this is his fate. All his ancestors fought in all the major US wars and invariably died on the battlefields. Lieutenant Dan ridicules Forrest's intention to buy a boat for shrimp fishing and states that if Gump becomes the captain of the ship, then Lieutenant Dan will be his sailor. On the same New Year's Eve, Dan meets two girls he knows and invites them to his apartment. But girls call Forrest a fool, and the lieutenant kicks them out for it. Members of the national ping-pong team are honored at the White House by Richard Nixon. Gump will soon be demobilized and now he can no longer play tennis for the army. Back at home, Forrest, at the insistence of his mother, enters into a contract with a manufacturer of table tennis rackets, which earns him enough income to take up shrimp fishing. Forrest buys a small boat, names it Jenny, and executes the plan that Baba had told him at length and carefully. Lieutenant Dan, having learned about this from Forrest's letter, keeps his promise and becomes a Gump sailor. At first, business goes badly. The stock of shrimp in the sea have run out because of the immoderate catch of numerous fishermen. But the Hurricane Carmen, which had flown in '74, destroyed the entire southern coast of the United States and smashed the ships that were laid up on the piers. Forrest and Dan, forgetting to check the weather forecast, set sail. The only survivor of the hurricane, the ship Jenny, returns to the destroyed port. Gump's and Dan's shrimp business becomes a monopoly and quickly gets rich. Over time, Lieutenant Dan realizes that Forrest did the right thing when he saved him, and belatedly thanks his friend for it. Having created a shrimp corporation, the friends stop go fishing themselves, and Lieutenant Dan finds the talent of a financier in himself. Upon learning that his mother is seriously ill, Forrest rushes to Greenbow. After her death from cancer, he decides to stay at Greenbow and starts mowing lawns. Gump completely trusts his assistant in financial matters, and Lieutenant Dan, by a successful investment, as it seemed to Gump in some kind of fruit company called Apple, provides them both with a comfortable existence. Since Forrest, due to his nature, does not need a lot of money, he donates funds for the construction of a church and a medical center, and also transfers a substantial amount to the Baba's family so that they do not need anything. One day, Jenny arrives and stays at Forrest's house. For some time they live together. Forrest proposes to Jenny. She refuses, but spends the night with Forrest and the next morning, without saying goodbye, suddenly leaves again. On the same day, a desperate Gump puts on the sneakers presented by Jenny and decides to go for a run. This run turns into a long way across the USA. For more than 3 years, he crosses the country several times from coast to coast, attracting a large following, popularizing jogging and becoming famous. During his run across America, Forrest comes up with the slogan "Shit happens" and also comes up with the idea for the smiley face logo. Suddenly deciding that enough is enough, he tells the runners behind, "I'm very tired, I'm going home." And he returns home on foot, leaving his fans in bewilderment. Sitting on the bench, Forrest ends up his life story. He tells his last listener that Jenny, seeing him on TV, sent a letter because of which he came to Savannah. Forrest finds Jenny's apartment, where she lives with her young son. The boy is the son of Forrest, named in his honor. Forrest asks if his son is as weak-minded as himself, to which Jenny replies that his son is the smartest among his peers. Jenny says that she is infected with a certain virus, for which there is no cure. The three of them return to Alabama. Jenny proposes marriage to Forrest and he accepts. Lieutenant Dan arrives for the wedding with his Vietnamese fiancée. To the Gump's question, does the lieutenant grow up new legs? Dan answers, he has got titanium prostheses and he can walk again. Some time later, Jenny dies from a disease caused by a virus. Forrest buries her under the same tree they used to play on when were kids. Forrest's son has grown up and it's time for him to go to school. Gump and his son are waiting for the bus to take the boy to school. The bus arrives and the younger Forrest leaves. Thank you for your attention. Press hearts, write comments to promote the channel and subscribe. Forrest subscribe.